So we spent a little time talking about healthcare policy. Now we're going to switch over and look at environmental policy in the country, see some of the steps that the national government has taken to preserve the environment for us. First up, we have like the original piece of environmental legislation, the National Environmental Policy Act. The main thing this did was it forces all government agencies to provide environmental impact statements to the government about any project that they're working on. So this is like the first thing that the United States did to like put a burden on the agencies to like look into the like impact that their project would have on the environment. It doesn't necessarily prevent an agency from doing something, but it does make the agency slow down and consider what they're doing. It does like help raise awareness about which projects are harmful and that can help like, motivate like public support and opposition of these things. So it does a lot to like force the government to take a look at the environmental impact of policies and raise awareness for all the rest of us about what these policies might do. The Environmental Protection Agency was created in 1970. This took a lot of environmental programs and put them into one big department. This is the biggest independent regulatory agency that we have. So, like, there is nothing Democrat or Republican about protecting the environment. It is just about, like, safe places for all of us to live, clean air and clean water and stuff like that. So, it's an independent so that once the people are put into office there, they basically operate on their own outside of the control of the president and Congress. They have a lot of rule-making power. So, like, if we go back to bureaucracy stuff, they're making a lot of the details of the law here. A great example of this is the original Clean Air Act. This was passed in 1970, and this gave the EPA the power to like improve the nation's air. So this is a mandate. The national government announced it and told the states that they have to put this into effect. Part of what it did was it forced the Department of Transportation to like start like regulating production of cars so that cars polluted less. And it forced the states to find different ways to like reduce air pollution in each of their states or whatever. And I ended up reducing air pollution overall by more than 10% pretty immediately. So this was a successful policy that helped clean up America's airs by the national government like putting in some guidelines. The EPA's power here would be to set the details of the law. They would decide what specifically would meet the guidelines for clean air. A couple years later, we have the Water Pollution Control Act. This is basically the Clean Water Act. It's pretty much the same thing as the Clean Air Act. It's also a mandate. It's up to the states to put this into action. And this focused on like stopping pollution into waterways, making sure that places couldn't just like dump garbage, dump chemicals and things like that into waterways that we use. And the result of this was a big time decrease in water pollution. Land conservation is also important. We have a ton of land in the United States, and this is like, one of our nation's big resources here. And the government has taken a big role in preserving a lot of this land. So, especially out west, a lot of the nation's land is owned by the federal government. And some of that is like national parks and other things like that. But a lot of it is just about conserving the land as it is and making sure that it's not used up until we have like more effectively used the spaces that we're already using. The national park system was created pretty early on in the 1900s. We have more than 300 national parks and more than 150 national forests across the country. And we have a lot of land that is designated as protected in the United States. In the map on the left, you can just see the different colored areas that represent land that is owned by the national government. The green stuff is like national forest. The light green is kind of national forest and stuff like that. And the gray stuff is some national parks. You might see some national parks in there. But a lot of this is just like the yellow stuff that you see is controlled. It's just controlled federal land. It's just being preserved. The red things that you see, those are land set aside for Native American reservations. But you see that this isn't really a big aspect of land in the eastern half of the United States, but looks like a huge chunk of federally owned lands out west. Another easy one to talk about is the Endangered Species Act. This was, does exactly what it was supposed to do. It protect species that were in danger of going extinct. And this requires the government to actively protect these animals on the list. And so there have been all sorts of animals saved and taken off of the list here. And the big thing to think about with the Endangered Species Act is this is a great example of how bureaucratic agencies set the details. Like it's up to the EPA to figure out which species are on the list and which ones get protected. This is not the kind of very specific detail that we want Congress to have to deal with. Another pretty creative environmental policy is what we call the Superfund. The Superfund is a tax that goes into the price of chemical products. Like when you buy some like household cleaners for your house and stuff like that that use dangerous chemicals, there's a tax added into the price there, and that tax goes into a fund that is used to clean up when there's like a toxic waste spill, when there's like a dangerous kind of like accident that needs to be cleaned up. The super fund is used to pay for that, and so now this helps like fund all sorts of stuff. All the little dots on the map there are what are called superfund sites, where like some kind of issue has happened before, and like a little spill, maybe even like something like a car accident, like a truck that has dangerous chemicals. Those kinds of things get cleaned up to make sure that the environment is a little safer than it was. Now, of course, our biggest environmental issue is going to be global warming, climate change. This is going to be an issue that it's up to the United States and all of the other governments of the world to cooperate to solve. Scientists are predicting that the Earth will be a few degrees warmer by the year 2100, and that's going to lead to warmer oceans, which will lead to ice caps melting, which will cause the sea levels to rise. This will be hugely devastating, especially with the amount of our economies that are like based on the coast and things like that. If the sea levels rise just a few feet, we're talking about like billions of dollars in like damage that can't be fixed. So it's up to the government to find ways to reduce our emissions that cause global warming. And so a plan, like an option to try to solve this, was first proposed by Obama, but this has been, tossed around in like Republican communities and Democratic communities and has been implemented in a couple of states. It's what we call a cap and trade system. This creates economic incentives for companies to reduce their amounts of emission. Like when basically the cap would be a limit that each company was allowed to pollute, and if a company pollutes less than that, they then have credits, which they can sell to other companies that haven't found ways to pollute less yet. So this would reward companies who were able to like reduce their emissions, and this would help like give an economic incentive to companies that were able to reduce pollution quickly. Now, we've had a recent big global agreement here, and this has been important politically here in the United States. In 2014, 196 countries around the world met in Paris, and they made an agreement called the Paris Climate Agreement that they would agree to do what it took to reduce their emissions so that we could prevent the global temperature from rising past 2 degrees warmer. So this was just an agreement that countries made with each other in order to work together, and this was agreed to under President Obama in 2014. In 2017, President Trump withdrew from this agreement. So that sent a message to the rest of the world that the United States would no longer cooperate on this issue. And Biden has announced his intention to rejoin this agreement. So it's important that the United States cooperate with other countries in the world, but it is difficult for other countries to trust the United States in these cooperations. If one president's going to get in, the other president gets out, the other president gets back in, it's hard to know what to expect from the United States. Very closely related to environmental policy in the United States is energy policy. So we want to take a look at what the United States, like what kind of resources we have and what we use to produce the energy that we need. So the most abundant source of energy in the United States is coal. 90% of the country's energy resources are in coal. Coal, unfortunately, is like the dirtiest way to produce energy. Coal creates a bunch of pollutants and all that. So, like, it is what the United States has the most of, but it's not necessarily what we use the most of. And it is definitely something that policymakers are trying to get away from just a little bit. So there's a lot of balancing here between the environmental environmental interests of the country and the interest of the states where coal mining is important. You can see the coal mining operations on the map here. So coal is incredibly important to these states in the Appalachians, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania especially. So the United States, like, we have an interest in getting away from use of coal, but these states in particular want to make sure that coal continues to be used because it's the resource they have the most of. Natural gas and oil are cleaner than coal. They still like cause some pollutants, but it's much better off than coal. And so natural gas and oil get used to create most of the electricity in the country. A big chunk of our electricity comes from natural gas sources now. The United States imports like a whole bunch of the oil that it consumes, but it also has become one of the world's biggest exporters in gas and in natural gas and petroleum. We can see on the map here, we can see all of the places where the United States is producing oil. And so you can see that this is a tremendous resource that we have a lot of, and this helps the United States both provide power for ourselves, but also have an important commodity to export. Oil is going to be an excellent way to bridge into our next topic of national security because when the United States has gotten most of its oil from other countries, that leaves us dependent or at least at the mercy of those countries for trade. So back in the 1970s, OPEC, which is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Companies, they put an oil embargo on the United States and it crippled the United States economy. The United States responded by starting to use what we call the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, meaning that what the United States does is we produce a whole lot of oil, but we save most of it. This is why we still import so much oil from other countries. We are importing oil from other countries to use now, and we are saving a ton of the oil that we make to help protect us from situations like this again. And probably in the future, the United States will be one of the last countries to have this resource. So this will help prevent another oil shortage in the United States. All right, so that's energy and environmental policy. Now we're going to shift over and start to talk about the foreign policy decision makers in the country.